Welcome to Marquette Moments for Friday, May 15th, 2015. We're here in City Hall. I'm Kyle Whitney. I'm with Mayor Mike Coyne and Marquette CFO Gary SImpson. Gary, thanks for stopping by today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Bill, unluckily or luckily perhaps, was out of the office today. He's out of town, so Gary's filling in for him. We were explaining to Gary beforehand. This is typically a session where we just kind of talk about current events, things that are happening. In your case, with some of the budget presentations, Gary, things that are going to be happening. The last time we had one of these, we actually just talked about Dave Blue's career for 20 minutes, and we all went home, so there wasn't a whole lot of current events there. But I mentioned the budget process, and we were saying beforehand, we're not even entirely sure where that is at this point, where the planning for the budget process this year is. Can you kind of give us an update, Gary, on what that schedule is, what the fiscal year schedule is, and when the City Commission is going to start having some of those discussions?
We're not doing a budget this year, so that I guess that takes care of that. So next question.
It's just a free-for-all?
No, actually, budgeting is a year-round process. It's just that the public doesn't see a lot of it. Sort of where it's going to kick off, we try to use the audit presentation to kick off the budget. We're trying to get that scheduled more for the end of June. It's not set in stone yet for the date, so I won't mention that. But we do have some dates starting to firm up. On Monday, July 6th at 5:15, we're going to do the CFO forecast. And that's the mechanism that staff uses to kind of set up the budget for the City Commission, to let them know what we're seeing. Even though it's called the CFO forecast, other people do have input into it. But it's something that I do spend a lot of time during the year watching, and it's just to let the City Commission know these are the things that we're seeing, not only locally but statewide, and also on a global basis, because things that happen in the Ukraine and out in Greece and the Middle East does have an impact on the city, so we do have to keep aware of what's going on there. So we kind of used the audit presentation and then the CFO forecast to get the ball rolling, at least to let the city commissioners and also department heads know this is kind of where we're standing before we even get into the meaty part of the budget. Then the very next night, July 7th at 5:15, and all of these meetings are in room 103 of City Hall, and we do encourage citizens or anybody who's interested to stop by and at least listen and even ask questions if you have those. So July 7th will be actually the first part of the budget where we're going to discuss capital outlay projects and capital outlay needs and what we're thinking we can afford to do during the next fiscal year. So that's the first part of the budget. Then we take the results of that meeting and start plugging it into each department's budget. So during this time, each department is already working on their budgets, the operating side. So we take the results of the capital outlay meeting, and that plugs in those numbers for capital outlay, because a lot of times that's a very large number, and sometimes the largest part of the budget is capital outlay. And a lot of that is street projects and other things that are needed to be done. Then after that, a lot of what's going to happen is we're just going to be putting the budget together. And when I say we, staff, and in a lot of cases me, we'll be putting the budget together. I'll be taking the submissions from each department, plugging that into the overall budget. Then I'll sit down with the city manager, and we will both sit down and talk with each department head to go over what they have submitted. And by law, we have to present a balanced budget. And if you don't know, but you can probably already guess, by the time department heads submit everything, we have nowhere close to a balanced budget. And by balanced, I mean revenues have to equal expenses. Mm-hmm. That's it in its simplest terms. And so we kind of go through the gyrations of, what has to be done. We usually try to set a precedence, what has to be done by law, all the way down to, well, this would be nice to have, but, we can actually get by without doing it. So we kind of prioritize that way. And as you set the revenue side of the budget, that dictates what you can do on the expense side. And on the revenue side, we do have some challenges coming up that we actually have been facing the past couple of years, but we have a very significant tax tribunal case against us with We Energies. That's going to dictate property tax revenue. There was also some legislation passed which changes how personal property tax is handled. There's still a lot of confusion on that, and I know there's currently some legislation being discussed to help kind of sort that out, because after the vote of the people, there was just a lot of miscommunication or just a lot of unknowns with municipalities as to how this is actually going to work. So a lot of that is still being hammered out. We still don't have exact numbers, but hopefully by the time we sit down and do the budget, we'll know exactly what we're facing there. And, you know, just anything that comes up, particularly from the CFO forecast, stuff that we might want to be aware of that may impact revenues. We're always keeping an eye out on state revenue sharing, because sometimes there's some gamesmanship played by the state with that when they're trying to balance their budget. So we have to keep an eye on that as well. So really, we're going to try to hammer out the revenue side. We're going to be spending a lot of time on the expense side as well, but you can't truly balance the budget until you know exactly what your revenues are going to be, or your best guess, and then we try to get the expenses to fit in with that. Then starting in mid to late August, that's when we do what we call the dog and pony show. That's when all the city staff meets with the city commission, and that's when we're presenting our version of the budget to them. And again, we encourage residents to participate. It's really kind of disappointing to me. I mean, I know I'm the bean counter. Maybe every bean counter says it, but setting the budget is probably the biggest thing the city commission can do, because that really dictates all the things that are going to happen throughout the next year at least, and even into the future. And I know the city commission, and I know staff as well, would love to have citizen input as to, you know, what they're saying is important to them. And it's better to have that going up front, rather than what usually happens is you adopt a budget and that's when people say that they're unhappy with certain things. Well, it'd be nice to know that beforehand, and maybe we could address it, you know, before we adopt the budget. So please, if you're a citizen and you're watching, please let department heads know your thoughts. Please let city commissioners know your thoughts, and please, if you can, participate in these meetings. And then, so that's kind of after late August, we hope to have everything wrapped up. And then in September, we'll be doing the public hearings and the ordinances and that kind of stuff to get the budget set, so that starting October 1, we hit the ground running.
Right. And in your honor, Mayor Coyne, Gary was kind of talking about, you know, getting public input, asking people to come out to these meetings to give input. Ultimately, I mean, the budget is a staff recommendation, or it's a recommendation filtered from staff through the city manager to the commission, but ultimately these are all city commission decisions on where a lot of these funds go. How effective is public input? I mean, I know we don't get a lot of it, as Gary noted, but were people to come to these meetings and, you know, voice their opinions on where the money should go, or where these line items should be budgeted, how effective is that? And I guess what would your response be to that? I know it's not something you've seen a lot of.
No. Well, first of all, you know, the budget doesn't just materialize out of thin air. It's based on a strategic plan that the commission has established to give guidelines to the administration as to what we want to work on, and that then reflects the budget process. So it's all of this is an ongoing, continuing effort to plan in the city. And as Gary mentioned, it's often very frustrating. We go through this. I mean, just listening to Gary, that's just a huge process. And then to go through all that and adopt it, and then a week later have somebody come and complain about it is kind of frustrating. So people can follow on the agenda of the city commission as to what is going to be discussed. It's not a secret, and if there are issues, and particularly one of the issues are often fee structures that we often get.
Yep.
And the reality of that is it's important for people to come and voice their opinion. The reality also is you can voice your opinion, but you then learn how important it is. You can't be a deficit spender. It has to be balanced. And many of these things which we do have to be reimbursed so we can run the city and not subsidize things that are not revenue producing to allow us to do the basic things that we need to do. So it's very important for them to come, and frankly, this is the most important thing that the city commission does, and that's the budget. And unfortunately, it's also the least attended. So that's frustrating, but it's also reality. But you can find out when there are issues that you really want to have input on and go to that. You don't have to go to the whole thing. This is the 13th budget I've participated in, and it is the most important thing. And interestingly, last year, all the candidates who were running for city commission attended the budgets, so they then are aware of what the issues are, what the financial problems and strengths are, and I would urge the 4 people running for commission to attend them so they have an idea, so they can hit the ground running. Because if they don't have an idea of what went into all this, they're off on another track often. It doesn't make sense, and they've got all kinds of ideas, and they say, well, okay, but we don't have any money for that particular thing. That was decided back in August. So I think that's a real strong message to folks who are running. And the realities, too, are we have some real unknowns in terms of revenue, and we have to prepare for that by not spending money that we don't have. So hopefully when we do have a plan set up, so if we come out better than expected, we can put that money back into the budget. But if it comes out the same as we expect or fear, then we have not spent that, so we still have a balanced budget. So it's very important, and I would hope that people would come to issues where they are particularly interested in, and also they can see why issues such as paying a fee to do something has to be, we feel, net revenue neutral, meaning balanced, and also the issue particularly of 40% or more of people using our services in the city don't pay or contribute any tax dollars to supporting them. And that issue always comes up, and the past couple commissions have been, I think, fairly brave and forthright about setting up things in motion to have that occur more and more, because we simply can't continue to subsidize things that aren't being paid for.
Right. It seems like recently the city commission in the last few years has been doing a lot of forward-looking, a lot of strategic planning. You mentioned that document. A lot of these, economic development planning, a lot of, structured plans going into the future. I've heard before, it's a popular statement to say that when it comes to municipal budgeting, a budget is pretty much the most basic statement of priorities that a community can have. More so than even a strategic plan, because it's allotting what's happening for the year. Is that a statement you agree with, or?
Well, yeah, but the budget is a result of the directions we've asked management that we feel the city wants to go in. So they're really very much related, but the budget is the reality time when you can have the finest priorities in the world in life and in city government, and if you can't afford it, you can't do it. So it is really the reality of what you can do with what you have available. And this city has done very well. They have not raised taxes in a long, long time, and they've continued city services by a strong budget, by good planning, by not spending money you don't have, and trying more and more to get things paid for by the people who use it, particularly who don't pay taxes.
So you said this is going to be your 13th budget?
Yep.
Does that best you, Gary? How many budgets have you been around for?
Well, in my career, this is probably like my 30th budget, but I've been with the city just short of 15 years, so this would be
So you're
probably
still,
my 15th.
so you're ahead of him.
I have,
But that is impressive for somebody who isn't their, it isn't their full-time job to do this. That's very impressive. And also too, that helps with the process because, as the mayor indicated earlier, you know, we do, because of term limits for commissioners, sometimes we have some experienced commissioners and some it can be their first go-round, and maybe they've only been on the city commission for a few months and they're still trying to figure things out. And that's where expertise that the mayor can provide. He can, you know, not tell people, you know, what to think or how to vote, but this is how the process works. And I know that can eliminate a lot of angst. Because a lot of time when you're, because the budget is a very big document, it can be sometimes close to 300 pages of information that we're giving them, and sometimes you see the deer in the headlights look, you know, like, well, what's important? What do I need to be paying attention to? And that's where people like the mayor can come in and help walk the new ones through this process.
well, in fairness, I think the budget often is a reason why people choose not to run, because it's intimidating to them, because they've never done it. And I have to say, I mean, I'd never done it before, and the process is so well organized and so well presented and so understandable that I think anybody with a reasonable amount of intelligence can figure it out and follow it and understand it. So speaking as a person who was the same way, I thought I actually got appointed right after the budget was formulated in 1984, and I had no clue what was going on, but that gave me a year to figure it out. But then my fear was I just am going to be overwhelmed by this. But after the process, I have never been with a commissioner who has gone through the process and had them say, I have no idea what's going on. They say, I get this, because it's very well presented and very understandable. So hopefully that wouldn't be a reason for people not to do it. If anything, if they don't do it, then they don't understand how the budget works.
Right.
Most of the time, and a lot of the complaints are they don't understand that you can't spend more than you have, and you have to allocate it. And that process is a very clear, concise way, and I would encourage people to run because you will understand it.
It's just a time commitment.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to go back and talk about a couple of things that were talked about and discussed and voted on in some way at the last city commission meeting. I think the most prominent one, this is something that staff has gotten a lot of questions about over the last few weeks. I'm sure the commissioners have gotten even more. The Lakeshore Boulevard closure. There was a vote by the commission at the last meeting to basically have staff move forward with opening that as soon as possible. It sounds like they're going to get to that prior to Memorial Day of this year, kind of kick off the summer season with Lakeshore Boulevard open. Can you kind of talk about that decision process and also some of the long-term outlook for that stretch of road?
Yeah, I'll give you my personal opinion. I'm frankly frustrated it took us 7 months to come up with that decision, to be quite honest. But the reason for that was, and still is, we are very concerned. We don't have $8.8 million to fix that road as it should be fixed. And just to say a simplistic answer is just open the road. That doesn't really address the problem, because probably in November, if there's another typical Lake Superior storm, that road will be destroyed again, or not destroyed, but beyond safe transportation providing. So it's very temporary. And our concern is we have to try to convince the federal government and the state government to help us fund the restoration of the lakeshore. I have some concerns that, frankly, the breakwater, how that has changed the direction of waves and sand fluctuations to maybe have encouraged these damages to occur to the road. And the federal government, Corps of Engineers, DEQ, EPA, who are always willing to step up and cause regulations, but not much help sometimes. They need to consider stepping up and helping us solve this problem, and it it is a temporary solution. And I would hope that if it happens again, we don't have to wait 7 months to say, okay, we'll fix it, and it's a temporary solution. But that is what it is, and the permanent solution would allow that to be fixed, I think, permanently. And the problem is, if we did it, and I asked Gary this, it was very helpful. If we passed a bond for $8.8 million, it's going to cost us, $1 million plus a year to pay the bond off. I mean, a bond is a mortgage, basically. So, and if you do that, then you have to tell 10 people who live on crappy streets that are falling apart, I'm sorry, for the next 15 years, you're going to have to live on that street. Well, there's priorities there, and which is the best priority, Lakeshore Boulevard or the street that you live on that looks like a third world street? To me, it's more important to fix that third world street, the water and the sewer and the aging infrastructure and the street that's falling apart, as opposed to driving on Lakeshore Boulevard. So we may have to make some priority decisions there down the road that may upset people. But the reality is, we don't have the money right now, and we can't just do that at the expense of streets, and we're not doing much of the streets because of the tax tribunals right now. I mean, so that's kind of a long rambling answer, but that's how I feel.
Well, we talk a lot too about the aging infrastructure in those streets, not just the surface, but I mean some of the water pipes we have in the city are 100 years old at this point.
And made out of wood.
Right, and there are slices of them sitting in the front of City Hall, and it's rather disturbing, I think, to have your water coming out of that. But Gary, just by way of context, when we talk about budgeting for annual street maintenance, how much money are we talking about annually on average? Because it's what, $8.89 million, the plan that's in the hopper to actually bring Lakeshore Boulevard, move it, bring it up to a safe and repaired status. How much are we talking annually for streets in general in the city?
Yeah, for the past few years, we're using $4 million, like a $4 million bond issue for projects that we could bond for capital outlay, and a lot of that were the street projects. That's not to say $4 million is going to the streets, because you do have other projects that need to be bonded. But let's say on average $2 to $3 million was being spent on street projects. Starting the current fiscal year we're in now, because of what we were seeing and because of a lot of unknowns with tax tribunal cases, like the mayor just said, we cut the total bonded limit to $2 million. So that means, if we're lucky, maybe $1 million of that can be spent towards streets. And that's pretty much the attitude we're taking going into this fiscal year yet. We really haven't set those numbers in stone, but at least that's what we have told city department heads to be preparing for, to make your recommendations fit within this. And then that's when we'll have our powwow among city staff to see, well, what are the priorities and what can we make work.
I'd like to follow up on that by asking you a question. Maybe it's a little unfair, but I like asking you unfair questions and challenging questions. For 25 years, nothing was put out for capital improvements on the infrastructure. And when I happened to be on a commission when that was pointed out, we haven't done anything at all for 25 years. That's why some of these streets are falling apart. And everyone just has ignored the fact that we have wooden pipes and terrible infrastructure. And we said, well, we're going to spend a certain amount of money every year to kind of catch up. Right now, do you know how much money we actually need to fix all the aging infrastructure and poor streets?
I don't know the exact number today, but I do know probably maybe it's like 10 years old now, but I know the engineering department did a study for those kind of things, and at that time it was like $250 million to just fix everything.
Almost there.
The thing is, and we started addressing that, we are certainly tackling the most dangerous situations because we are concerned about public safety, but you can't get everything on the list, and those projects you can't get to, as they're put down further down the road, those costs go up because of inflation. So, what was $250 million now back 10 years ago could easily be, several $1 million more just based on the inflationary impact of all of that.
Well, my point is, let's just say $250 million is really, $250 million, okay? And let's say because of I remember that study, and let's say it's $300 million. Well, if we say, all right, in our brilliance, we're going to ignore it, okay, for 25 years, well, then it'll be like a zillion dollars, okay? So the commission has said, we have got to keep pecking away at this, and ideally, we were retiring bonds and then bonding for the same amount and using that money for capital improvements. Well, because of what's the reality in taxes now and Michigan Tax Tribunal stuff, we've had to reduce that from 4 million to 2, and that gets reduced even less into 1 million for roads. Well, guess what? If you fix one road in my neighborhood a couple years ago, it cost almost $1 million to fix it. Well, that's one road.
Yep.
And everybody says, well, why aren't you fixing my road? Well, they have this, fortunately, system called the passer system, which rates roads. So you can't have a commissioner saying, oh, I want my road fixed, or Gary can say, listen, I'm going to manipulate the budget here so my road can get fixed. It's strictly objective. And I'll give you an example. The road I live on was supposed to be fixed in 2011. Well, I mean, it's like probably now infinity when it's going to get fixed because there's no money.
Right.
But it's all an objective system, and it's very hard. And you can't just use the whole budget for roads. You have to do police and fire protection and garbage and all kinds of other things. So it's a real challenge, But we're not ignoring it as it had been ignored, which is causing this problem.
So we were talking about Lakeshore and talking about the $1 million roughly that you're currently budgeting for roads every year. So we're looking at, if we're not looking at raising taxes or not looking at taking out additional bonds, if we weren't to do anything with roads for 8.5 years, we could talk about fixing Lakeshore at this point.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, is by doing Lakeshore, then all things being equal, you're just putting off almost 9 years of other road projects just to do that.
Which kind of brings you back to the hoping for some outside help.
Well, if we don't have outside help, I'm not very comfortable saying, okay, the 10 worst roads, too bad, we're going to fix Lakeshore so we can drive up and down and look at the lake. That's not acceptable to me at all. And people have to realize that. People can say, I want Lakeshore. Okay, well, I want a lot of things in life, and I don't have the money. Well, we don't have the money to do that.
Right. One thing that I also wanted to touch on prior to, it was a couple of meetings ago, we talked about a trip that you and a couple of commissioners had planned to Tennessee to visit DLP headquarters, Duke Lifepoint's headquarters. We didn't get the opportunity to talk about that last meeting, and I know you recounted the trip in a city commission meeting. Where does that stand? We were talking before this program now about their hospital advisory committee in the UP planning on giving some updates. Can you share a little bit about that? I don't really know what that's about.
Well, I think the trip to Tennessee was very helpful, both to the city and to Duke Lifepoint. Duke Lifepoint, is a national organization, and they struggle with, I think they have like Duke and Duke Lifepoint have like 70 hospitals, so all the local issues are very hard for them to get their hands on, and Duke Lifepoint has never done a tertiary healthcare center, so this is an even more challenge for them. And we were very open with them that they needed to do a better job in terms of communication with the community. And it had fallen to the city commission, whereas the communication was mainly people were inputting. But the reality is the city doesn't own the hospital. The corporation owns the hospital, and they're going to buy land, and they have to do the communicating, not the city. We're selling them the land and providing a brownfield opportunity to help them finance a $400 million building program. And they got that message. And one of the solutions that they had come up with was they have a hospital advisory committee, which is made up of local people, local meaning UP people from all over the UP, who advise the board at Duke Lifepoint as to local issues. And they felt that that would be a very good vehicle to come forward to have open sessions for the community, report periodically to the city commission as to what those were, and also report to Duke Lifepoint so they know what the issues are, and hopefully within the next month that will happen. And I'd asked the new chief operating officer just when I heard that Mr. Banos was leaving, well, when are you going to do that? And hopefully that would be in a month or two that they would be coming forward with a program to implement that, so the community has an opportunity to communicate their concerns about the new hospital or whatever it is, and then they could get on with that. And I think that would be very beneficial to them, and it would hopefully in the long run beneficial to everyone in the UP to have this hospital built.
Okay. So, and I know that seems like we've had this conversation repeatedly, talking about looking forward to some public outreach from DLP, and I know that, you know, this is a long-term project that they're working on planning right now, but it sounds like that's finally coming at some point.
Well, I think they're committed to it. Their public relations group was very excited that this was going to happen. They felt that was really needed, and to have the both members of the hospital advisory committee who were there in Nashville, the CEO was there, a bunch of vice presidents from Duke Lifepoint were there, and the three of us commissioners and city manager were there, and that was very productive. The proof will be in what happens, right. And I'm watching that, okay? Right. And I think it will happen.
Okay. I think that's you know, that's pretty much probably all the time we have. I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to speak to specifically, or you, Gary? I know you don't get this opportunity very often to speak to the camera, so anything you want to talk about?
Just a quick update. I know a lot of people at one time were very interested in the Smart Zone activity that we have going on in the city, and I was the staff that was pretty much strictly heading that up. Just to give a brief update on that, there were two state agencies that needed to sign off on the tax increment financing plan. The city commission approved it. Then we had to send it to the MEDC, which is the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. They signed off on it. Then the next step was to send it to the state treasurer's office, and that's where it's kind of been held up. We're just in a holding pattern. There's been some changes in the state treasurer's office. In fact, even the state treasurer himself that position is with the new person now. So we're hearing that it's going to be very soon that we get feedback on our TIF plan, and then once that is approved, then we can start collecting the TIF taxes and get it up and running. But that doesn't mean because we don't have funding that activity hasn't been taking place. The LDFA did appoint a Smart Zone ad hoc committee, and that committee has gone ahead and filed 501c3 incorporation papers. That is currently in the hands of the IRS, who approves that. We hope to hear something soon, but really, it's one of those things you don't really know how long it's going to take a federal agency to get to something that you have specifically requested, but we do hope to hear at any time. And once that has gone through, then things will really start moving forward. I know they've been talking to an executive recruiter company to help the ad hoc committee recruit an executive director for the Smart Zone. So that's kind of where things are happening, even though there hasn't been anything out in the news, because there really isn't a lot we can report on just yet. There is activity going on, and the next big thing will be getting approval from the state treasurer's office, and we did make contact even with the governor, and the governor has promised to try to push that through as quickly as he can as well. So things are looking hopeful.
I would just say thank you, Gary, I know you don't like doing this very much, but you did a very fine job. Thank you.
Thank you.
We got lots of other issues, and we can do that the next time.